All right, so we're in Colossians chapter 4, and last week we have. Hold on just a second. Let me get over where I need to be. Yeah, last week we talked about. We have basically just dealt with the first two questions. What does it mean for the wife to be in subjection in the marriage relationship? Which is what verse 18 says. And then what does it mean when he says, as is fitting in the Lord? And we talked really in depth about all those things. We drew from Genesis, we drew from Ephesians, and we'll do pretty much the same thing dealing with the man as well. And some great discussion. One of the things that we mentioned last week is extremely important in the conversation, and this goes all the way back into Genesis 1, and that is that what you see in the Bible is equal in essence, different in function. Equal in essence, different in function. Very, very important. In other words, there is spiritual equality in the sense of the relationship between a man and a woman, a man and God and a woman and God. Functionally, within the family, there's a difference, and there's should be no surprise understanding that. There should be no surprise that God created the man and woman differently, and that difference in the way He designed the man and the woman, it creates both a wonderful complementariness when we're spirit-led, and it also creates some conflict when we're in the flesh. And so, but the equality is not about equality. It's about functional difference from God's perspective. And so that's always important to understand. So when we get to question 3, one of the things that we see here is the question says, what does it mean for the husband to love his wife? That's not a trick question. So how would you explain that?
The Bible tells us that as Christ loves the church.
Absolutely. Yes. That's Ephesians 5, right? Ephesians 5, which is kind of takes this little section in Colossians and expands it in depth. And remember, we talked about last week that probably the letter to the Ephesians was actually a circular letter. We have manuscripts where that word Ephesian is not in there, and the guess, the speculation, that's the word I was looking for. The speculation is that was one of those epistles that was passed from church to church. And it probably went to Ephesians first and then passed on to other churches. But later, the Colossian church would have gotten that letter and read it and read the much more detailed explanation. But, of course, we have resources to draw from here. We have, of course, 1 Corinthians 13. Remember, 1 Corinthians was one of the early letters of Paul. And Paul in 1 Corinthians 13 explains what love is. And the man is certainly called to love his wife in a Christ-like way, which means all of those things. And maybe we should turn and read that. If someone would turn and read that. 1 Corinthians chapter 13. That's the love chapter, isn't it?
My dad's favorite chapter in the whole Bible.
It's wonderful. If someone can read verse 4 through the first little phrase in verse 8.
Love suffers long and is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not parade itself, is not puffed up, does not behave rudely, does not seek its own, is not provoked, thinks no evil, does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails, but whether there are prophecies, they will fail. Whether there are tongues, they will cease. Whether there is knowledge, it will vanish away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part.
Okay, that's good.
Okay.
So as I read that, I'm convicted. If somebody says, "Do you love your wife?" I want to qualify. I want to say, I really love my wife, but I've not arrived at this yet. That's the high mark, certainly. But you read through that and you think, wow. Are you always patient with your wife?
Yeah, the same way she's patient.
Right. I mean, this is really the high water mark in the sense of love. This is the way God loves us: patient, kind, not jealous, not arrogant or bragging. Not in an unbecoming way. He's not seeking his own. In fact, he's seeking our good. Not provoked. Something, like they drop our breakfast, you just overlook it. Honey, we can redo that. Or it just, those are daily challenges, right? To love someone in that way. Yeah, Frank?
When I think of patience, I think of Christ with his disciples. That was
Yes,
patience.
yeah.
Over.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
and with us too. as a matter of
Yes.
fact.
Yeah,
We're just as hard-headed as they were. I always said, "You're not make a perfect Jew," because I was just like that.
yeah. They were Jews, but they were just humans. They were like us.
Just like us.
Same heart.
Yes.
As us. So 1 Corinthians 13 is a general explanation of love. Remember, the whole purpose for writing this, from Paul's perspective, was to correct, to show the church in Corinth all your sin and all your problems. The thing that'll solve all those things is you start loving each other like this, and all that stuff will go away. More specifically, as Gene mentioned, is Ephesians chapter 5, which gives us, kind of a laundry list of how we are to love our wives. And not that it's any less challenging than 1 Corinthians 13. Really, it's 1 Corinthians 13 specifically for a man is what it is. And so, for some reason, they took it out of my Bible. No, there it is. There it is. I thought they did, but they didn't. Okay, so chapter 5, starting in verse 25. Can someone read 25 through 30?
Husbands, love your wives just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her, that he might sanctify and cleanse her with the washing of water by the word, that he might present her to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she should be holy and without blemish. So husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. How far?
Yeah, that's good. I had the opportunity. You guys were praying for me this last weekend. I had the opportunity to speak to about 40 men and young boys from 10 to 18 down at the state park, and we dealt with this passage in how the husband's to love his wife. And one of the I remember the first time I really studied this in depth. It was reading through a book called Disciplines of a Godly Man by R. Kent Hughes. Fabulous book. I would recommend it to any man. And for the first time, it struck me that my life was supposed to sanctify my wife. In other words, my walk with the Lord was to be such that the longer we were married, the more holy she was because she was married to me. Now you think about that. Because the parallel here is Christ dying for the church to sanctify her, to make her holy. And as we're to imitate Christ, that's the way we're to live our life. I mean, that is challenging, right? And so that's the kind of love that Paul is telling the Colossians that they need to have for their wives, and sanctify her, to cherish her, to nourish her. You know, all of the things that verse 29 talks about cherishing, nourishing, and cherishing her, just like Christ does the church. So in every way, our lifestyle and the way we display love to our wife should be Christ-like, sanctifying, and drawing her closer to Christ. Now that is a huge, huge charge to us, man. It really is. And I know we don't always do it perfectly, but like I've told you in everything else in the whole area of holiness, we don't drop the bar. Because the culture is always wanting to drop the bar on that. And our flesh always says, well, she said this. I'm going to drop it down here because I'm getting back at her about that, you know. And of course, if we love our wives as Christ loved the church, and as First Corinthians 13 said, even the things that she does out of her flesh, our response is to be godly. I even think of things like this, and this you can think of this as a man. Sometimes you say something like real strongly to your wife, and it's not that you're mad at her, but you're doing something and you're trying to concentrate. I don't know if y'all ever had this happen. You're trying to concentrate on something, and she says something to you and you react. You know, it's not like you're mad at her, you're just frustrated, right? And maybe she does that to you. I don't know. Maybe she doesn't. But if she does that to you, those are the things you just, okay, I just let that go. You know, it's not a big deal. Just letting stuff go. We don't have to do tit for tat. In fact, if we do tit for tat, we're going to look like total pagans. We really are. You know, and we certainly are not going to live up to this as loving our wives as Christ loved the church. So this is the next question. What is the husband to avoid in his relationship with his wife? In verse 19 of Colossians. What's he to avoid? Okay, bitterness. Has anybody else got a different translation?
Well, I looked up bitter in the dictionary.
Okay.
And it says distressing her, shame, animosity, contempt. All those things are the bitterness.
So,
It's an act of it's a hateful act.
yes.
It's something very hateful.
Mine says harshness or angrily resentful.
What was it?
Harshness or angrily resentful.
Yes.
Okay, so what causes that? Because, okay, well, think of this. He's not given any particular situation here. He is talking about the wife and the husband. If he's writing this to the husband, then most certainly our wives do things that might push our flesh to be bitter or frustrated, or what did you say?
Harshness or resentful.
Or harsh or
Angrily
resentful.
Yeah. I think differences in expectations. You know, you're expecting one thing and whatever that situation.
You nailed it. I mean, that is a huge one right there. And you know why? Because he built men and women differently. And we cannot avoid that. That was a good thing before the fall.
Right.
Okay? When there was no sin nature, because those designs were perfect. Remember, he said at the end, this is very good. All of it is very good, you know. And so those differences, and I think of, we think differently, we communicate differently, we process information differently. All of those, I mean, there are many others, but those are huge ones right there.
Respond.
Thinking
Yeah.
differently, communicate differently, processing information differently. And on top of her being different in all of those things, she's a sinner. Of course, she's married to a sinner, you know. But with that in mind, because of all of those things, unless we live like, and Peter has the word here, right? Peter says, you're to live with her in an understanding way. And that understanding way is understand that she thinks differently, she communicates differently, she processes information differently.
Bill tells me all the time, I'm arguing my point of view and he's arguing his point of view. And it's like, he says, we're saying the same thing,
Yes.
but we're just missing it.
Yeah, and that can happen.
We just put things together.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Unfortunately, my problem is, I think everybody thinks like I do.
Right,
And unfortunately, very fortunately, that's not true.
right. But we all do that.
Can't happen.
You know, nowadays, if I was, if I had grown up 20 years ago instead of several years before that, somebody probably would have put me on some kind of Ritalin or something, because my mind can go from one subject to another like that. And so you can imagine when I'm engaged with my wife and she's sharing something that's very important to her, and I look over and there's a neat looking fly on the table. You know what I mean? And that's not malicious, but my mind works that way. It's like boom, 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 boom. I'm here, there. And that's caused more than one conflict with us. I don't know if y'all can imagine that, but it really can.
I thought you were perfect.
Yeah, I did too. But I'm the only one that did. That's the problem. Those are the kinds of things, because we are built differently. We have to work hard at understanding each other, and we have to be very quick to forgive each other, whether it really is an offense, or it is what's the word? Perceived offense. You know what I mean? I promise you, there are people, and I've probably done it, get very, very angry at a perceived offense. But that's not what it was at all, but that's what was going on in this mind.
Not only do you have to deal with reality, you have to deal with somebody else's idea of reality.
Right. What's reality to them? Counselors will tell you that. It's very important to just listen to people. Because sometimes, especially as a teacher, sometimes I want to listen to somebody, and as they say something that I think's wrong, I want to correct them. No, this verse or that verse, or this is the way you should be thinking. And a good counselor doesn't do that. A counselor just listens for a long time, because they want to understand what is reality in that person's mind. What are they thinking? How are they thinking? And then they can help them once they figure that out. So, you think about all that we've just talked about, and you think, how does anybody ever stay married? He created the man and the woman so incredibly differently. But again, before the fall, it was wonderful. and of course, Ephesians 5 gives the answer to that. Because first, it says, bottom line is, you got to be allowing the Spirit of God to control you. That is Ephesians 5:18. Be filled with the Spirit. Don't be drunk with wine, but be filled with the Spirit. So you got to say, God, you help me today. Sometimes you have to say that all throughout the day. It's really bothering me. Yes.
We all do things that could make people better for themselves. Not only our mate, but other people.
Yes.
And forgiveness is a big, big portion of it. That's what you instantly. I had some people that I knew when they were walking down the street, they were going to say something. They were just going to, that was just their nature.
Right.
They were going to say something other people would be bitter about or something. So I would just start saying, well, I forgive them, whatever it is. I would just do it, you kind of got to do that in your marriage. You gotta-
Absolutely.
whatever comes along, let's do it continually.
Yeah. I tell you what, there is no marriage that survives 30, 40, 50 years unless that's true, unless you're forgiving. You can't, a marriage will not survive very long unless that bitterness and those debts are paid for, are forgiven and put away and forgotten about. Because it'll just build up and it's like poison. It'll poison a marriage and it'll destroy a marriage.
My parents literally lived the thing about not to let the sun go down on your anger. They
Absolutely.
would not go to bed angry with each other.
That's good. That's
Yeah.
a very good
Yeah.
thing to do.
And
Really
you have
is.
People, I know a particular person who is very bitter over how life is treated.
Yes.
And therefore, she doesn't read, listen to the same preachers I read, because Jeffress just really gave it.
I heard that this
lately
morning.
on
He did a
his
great.
program
Yes.
about forgiving, and, but,
Yes.
you don't have ears to hear. It's just a program.
One of the things he said this morning, and I'm not going to say it just the way he said it, but the idea was this: if you don't forgive, you're putting yourself in prison.
No,
You really
not
are.
hurt
It,
anybody
you're
but
just
yourself.
you don't. God doesn't have to pour out any wrath on you. You're creating your own
It's true.
prison, your own bondage, your own destruction, because it'll destroy you,
It will.
and it'll destroy everybody around you.
It's destroyed her body.
Yes.
She has, whatever she has.
Yeah.
Not fibromyalgia, thank you. And a lot of it is probably all the anger and hurt that she's held with her mother and daddy. They were poor, they were very poor. And she's still angry at her mother and daddy because they bought her older sister a new dress and she never got a new dress. That's because she got the hand-me-down.
Right.
And that's just.
I did too.
destroyed
I was the youngest, so I always got hand-me-downs.
So, I mean, it's destroying her life. But she can't see it.
We know someone like that, and the thing is we know her for all her life, and now she's grown, and she would tell us what a bad childhood she was. Now, I never gave her any attention. I'm thinking, well, where were you when all of this was happening? Because it's my daughter. And when her and when I and her brother separated, I picked her up every weekend. I got her every weekend I could. I took her to church. I kept her in church, and now she's telling me, well, I have such a bad. I was never happy. And I'm thinking, what? So I don't understand. But you know what I think? What you said. I don't think she's learned to forgive. I think she needs to forget it, forgive, and say, I need to move on.
Yes.
So yeah, she's got that attitude, and I just don't understand it. I don't.
That should build better character in them when they learn to do,
It
be
should.
poor and then you come out of that.
Yes.
And that's what I told her. We work poor, and I don't think I ever owned more than 2 pairs of pants until I graduated high school. Then I got to dress pretty nice because I was in the military. So, but it never affected me. And the thing was, is I went to a pretty nice high school, but I was never made, or at least God protected me. I was never made fun of. Now I played every sport I played, and I lettered and everything. And and I was popular in that, and the richer guys, the things that they would tell me the most was, man, he'll talk to anybody, you know? But God, then God let me see how blessed we were, even though we had nothing. We thought
Yeah.
we weren't any different than anybody.
Most of us were poor and didn't know it. That's the
Exactly.
way I was. I never even knew I was poor until I grew up and realized it.
Exactly,
And there's a
that's
degree.
exactly true.
Oh.
Rusty,
Yes, ma'am.
I believe that the essence of being able to do as we're told, as we're reading,
Yes,
first, it's a reverence for God.
Yes.
no doubt
Because
about it.
our
Yes.
submission to our husband, especially, I mean, if you're a wife or a husband, it doesn't have anything to do with how competent they are, how good they are, what they're doing. That's beside the point.
Right?
Submission is to God.
Yes.
It's obedience to God, and without that reverence to God, these are going to be very difficult things to accomplish.
Yes.
Essentially, we can put it
Yes.
on, we can look like it, we can play the role, but it's the reverence for God and the awe of God is where our hearts really have to be in order for this to be actionable.
You're right.
I believe
Yeah, that's the absolute foundation.
100%. It's not going to work unless you are following Christ and God. It's not going to work. You can't do this on your own.
Well,
This is gonna-
you can't fake it till you make it. I mean, this
That's
is
right.
just not that kind of a
So
thing.
there-
That's the world's idea.
Right.
But this is God business.
Yeah.
And whether you're a female that has to submit to your husband, or you're a male and you're saying, I didn't vote for this, having to lead all the time and be Christ-like and sanctify I didn't vote for this. You have to remind yourself, it goes back to what you said. If you reverence Christ, if you fear God, you have to remind yourself, He is the one that designed it this way.
That's right.
If you have a problem with the design, you need to talk to Him.
That's right.
And if you say, I just love God, but I can't stomach this, you have to remember He's the author of this. This is His baby here. This is His design. And so it like most theology, it comes back to, who do you believe God is?
Exactly.
And do you really love Him? And do you really fear Him?
And all of the sinning that we're doing, if it's making our husband miserable or making our wife miserable or against all of these things that he's saying, you're not sinning against them. You're
No.
sinning against God. Because this is God's perfect plan
Yes.
for everything to be as He designed it to be.
Amen.
Absolutely.
And we're so filled, our unredeemed flesh is so powerful at
Amen.
times that we're so determined to
Yes.
have our own way and do what we want. And we fight dragons and everything else to defend our positions.
Yes.
So without that relationship and without that reverence, we can't do
It ain't
Amen.
gonna work.
And the reverence applies here too, in the sense of being bitter towards your wife,
it. Exactly.
because you cannot hold on to bitter. If you become bitter, you're holding on to unforgiveness.
That's right.
And if you're holding on to unforgiveness, you need to remember what the rest of Matthew 18 says. He forgave everything to us and said we're to forgive everything from everybody else. We're to forgive them of everything. So we don't have any kind of leg to stand on to not forgive our spouse of something. Period. Now, does saying that make it easy if
Oh,
you
no, absolutely.
deal with infidelity, or your husband or your wife gambles away your life savings and you find out about it? There are horrible things that happen in marriages.
Absolutely.
I'm not saying that pious platitudes make that emotion and that frustration go away overnight, but ultimately you're to love her as Christ loved the church, and you are not to be bitter toward her, which means you need to forgive her of everything, period. And I know men that live with wives like that, and I know women that live with husbands like that, and they're still married to them
Yeah.
by the grace of God and their obedience to God.
That's right.
Rusty, one of the
And I hope they get a
questions-
lot of crowns when they get up in heaven. 'cause-
They will.
One of the questions I used to ask couples is there anything you would, when I was counseling, is there anything you would forgive?
That's good, Steve.
And, is there any reason you wouldn't forgive them, person? they wouldn't say yes, I would do that. They would say, no, there's nothing I would. I said, any circumstance, you can be divorced. If they said yes, they were out my door, I would not try to do that.
That's
I said,
good.
If you don't love each other in that way,
Yeah,
don't get married.
unconditional.
But I had a lot of people get mad.
I'm sure you, yeah.
Well, this is diametrically opposed to everything that the world says.
Yes,
This
it
would be
is.
impossible to understand. if
Even
you
the
weren't-
church is fighting against it.
Exactly, because it's hard enough to understand if you're in the church and supposedly know what the Bible says. I mean, the statistics are there to prove that. And
Yes.
if you're in the world and don't know the word, then goodness.
They think
It's
we're nuts.
so hard for a bitter person to serve God.
Yeah.
How can you serve God if you have bitterness in your heart? I mean, that's almost
Against
impossible.
anybody, whether it's your wife or
Yeah,
anybody else, or
exactly.
your husband or
Exactly.
whatever. That's right. All right, so let's jump down to the next one. We've grilled the men enough now, and the women. Let's beat up on the children here. Oh wait, I've got one more. What is the husband to avoid in his relationship with? Oh, we just dealt with that. Okay, okay. Question 5. What is the children's principal responsibility in the family relationship, and what is implied that will displease the Lord? And what does obey imply in regard to being a parent? Verse 20. So let's go with the first one. What is? I'm sorry. Go ahead. First question. Obey. That's not. I mean, that's the way he structured the family. If you've got a husband and wife living the way they're supposed to be living, like we just talked about, according to God's design for the family, then what the children have to do is they're watching that and they're to obey. So if they're to obey, what is implied in this that will displease the Lord? Maybe somebody needs to read that verse again.
Children, obey your parents in all things, for this is well pleasing to the Lord.
So what's implied that will displease the Lord? Disobedience. Disobey. So what does obey imply in regard to being a parent? So if the children is to obey you, what does that imply about you?
You gotta give them the right kind of instruction.
You're right, W.A. You listen.
Not to be bitter toward them either.
Listen, in a sense, because remember, I don't know if y'all still have that little illustration I gave you last week, but if you look at the design of the family, yes, that one right there with the son obeys the father, talking about the Son of God, obeys Father God. He is our head as the husbands in the family, so we are following him. We're being instructed by him. We're being taught by him. We're obeying him. We are following him. In fact, if we don't know how to follow him, we really don't know how to lead the family. Does that make sense? You got to learn how to follow
Absolutely.
to lead. Follow the father and son. That's exactly right,
But
Retha.
I thought this was interesting what you put on here. One flesh relationship from top to bottom.
Yes,
The oldest to young.
yes, and
You
s-
get married and you become one flesh.
yes.
But I never thought of carrying it on.
And remember, the boys and the girls, they're watching your relationship. How does this work? How does this function? What does Dad do to lead? And so when you see this, you realize, and this is a scary thought, that you and your wife become, in a sense, God to those kids. Now you're pointing them to God, but you're the one that teaches them the truth of God's Word and the fact that they are to submit to God's authority. And you teach them that as they submit to your authority. So because a natural man does not submit to anybody's authority. A natural man, he does what he wants to. That's the heart of a natural man. He does what pleases him. And so these little sinners that we had, we've got to teach their unsaved heart and eventually their saved heart that life is all about submitting to somebody.
That's right.
And so if they learn how to submit to you as parents, then they're not going to have a problem learning to submit to God or their boss or their teacher or the people within society that we're to submit to, the laws of the land. You look at the reason why we live in a lawless society today, a growing lawless society, is because more and more children are not raised. I'll use the term, I think I mentioned this before. Joanna and I talk about nowadays you see all these free range kids. They're not having this pattern. Their parents are off doing something else, and they keep them active in this, that, and the other, but they don't spend quality time with them. They're not at home. They're not seeing how the father, their mother and their father interact with each other. They're not sitting and hearing their father read the Word of God. You know, the husband doesn't have to be a Bible scholar,
No.
but anybody can sit and read the Bible and talk about it with their kids, you know. And I told those guys this week, this weekend, I mean, none of us are ever going to know every answer to every question about the Bible. We're just not going to do it in this life. But if your kids grow up seeing you reading the Bible to them and talking about it and talking about how it should affect the way they live, and they asked you a question, you say, no, you know what, Johnny? I have no idea about that. That is a great question. Let's figure that out together. We'll talk to the pastor, or we'll look it up, or whatever. What an incredible example. You know what they're going to do? If they follow your pattern, they're going to do the same thing. And many times they will. But also remember, they grow up and become adults and they make their own choices. So sometimes you left them a good pattern in areas and they abandoned it. But you're not responsible for that. Yes.
Well, another thing that goes along with that
And WA has something to say after that.
is going to church. If you
Yes.
are in the practice of going to church and taking your children to church,
Yes.
that's just a part of what
Yes.
they believe.
Yeah.
But another thing was the one saying that my kids would say all the time is, "You're not the boss of me." You know, they'd say that to each other. Well, you're not the boss of me. You know. Well, there you go. They just wasn't going to take it. You know. So yeah.
Yeah, I would have said that once to my dad. And then I would have found out he is the boss of me.
Not to
I'm
me.
sure I would've got that whole
They
thing
were
out of
saying
my
it to
mouth.
each other.
Oh, to each other. Oh, okay, yeah.
Oh, they knew
Yeah.
what you said.
Yeah.
Yeah, now I would say that to my brother, and then we'd
Yeah.
get after it, you know.
Yeah.
And then I'll never forget the last time I got a spanking with a belt. I was probably 6th or 7th grade. Charlie's 2 years older than me. And my dad drove in from work and pulled in the driveway, and we were out there fisticuffing. At that age, you talk about humiliating. We went in the bathroom, leaned over the old bathtub, and got the belt. That's the last time I needed it. I finally learned my lesson at that age.
Yeah, really.
But the bottom line is there's a lot of creative ways to quote discipline. It doesn't always have to be the belt, but there are capital offenses that the belt is needed,
Yeah.
you know, and it also depends that kind of parenting. You have to realize every child's different.
Absolutely.
And you have some children that if you spank them with a belt many times, it just crush them, you know.
Yeah.
They're very compliant children, you know.
absolutely, yeah.
You have other ones that are they're type A, and I mean, you can beat the tar out of them, and they'll be doing the same thing the next day, you know. Y'all know that. Every
The next
kid's
day,
different.
The next hour.
And you have to pray a lot, right?
Yeah.
God, what I do with this kid? Why didn't you make him like these? You know. Well, he didn't make them like these because that's not what he wanted to do. He's made them that way for a reason. I mean, how many Army Rangers, how many cocky airmen Would we have, how many Marines would we have if God didn't make young men like that? Some young men. I'm not among them, but I'm not jumping out of a plane or anything like that. But
They're like pups. Some children are like pups. You can take a pup and whoop them and whoop them and whoop them. It does you no good.
Yeah.
I've had some dogs I've had to chain up for 30 days. Did no good. And the same way with children. Sometimes you got to figure out another way.
you got to figure out what works with
can take a
them.
whooping and that ain't gonna
Doesn't
phase
phase them.
them.
Yeah.
You got to figure out somehow.
WA.
Where you're talking about
I'm sorry.
free range kids.
Yeah.
I keep relating back when, used to coach baseball when the kids were 7, 8, 9, all the way up to 12, 13.
Right.
A lot of parents, not all of them, a lot of them use that as babysitters. They
Yes.
drop the kids
No
off,
doubt.
and you would never see them until practice. Then you had to wait for them to show up.
Yeah.
And so basically, you had to be the example for them. That's tough if it's not your kid. A lot of things
Yes.
you cannot do
Right.
to somebody else's kid as far as correcting them that
Yes.
you do to your own.
Yes.
And it made it tougher on my kids, and I felt bad about that because I could do something with them that I couldn't do to somebody else's
Right.
kid. And I had to watch myself.
And that was what, maybe in the 70s or 80s that you were
It was,
coaching?
late 70s, early 80s.
Yeah. The sad part is a sinful trend develops in our culture, and kids grow up that way. They see that, they imitate it, and it gets worse and worse. And nowadays, I wouldn't coach baseball. The only way I'd coach baseball is if God really called me to that,
Yeah.
and I felt like He was going to use me to help some of those little kids.
Found out
You
that a
know.
lot of coaches, and I was kind of the same way. I'd coach like younger kids. They got to be 12, 13 years old. I did not want to coach them
Yeah.
because most of them, not all of them, but most of them, they did not want to submit to my authority as a coach.
Right. And it's hard to coach if they won't
It
submit to
is.
your authority. What were you going to say, W?
I was
what,
going to
Nelda?
say, it seems like one generation, that each generation kind of increases whatever bad is like. When our kids were growing up, the big thing seemed to be kids needed to be entertained all the time, so you would sit them down in front of a video.
Yes.
Nowadays, kids have to be entertained all the time, so they have video games and computers and all of this kind of stuff. And I'm sure that, we grew up in that don't tell your kids no generation.
Right.
That didn't
I know,
work.
yeah, I don't know what that was all about. But it just seems like we more and more cut them off from that personal relationship with their family.
Yeah.
Because you put them over there and said, y'all take care of this, I'm gonna go do something else, and
Yeah.
Television was a great babysitter. Is a great
DVDs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What we did as Marines is, we do a little contract. You do A, you're gonna get B. And if you deem it to do neither, then you're gonna get B.
Yes. Yeah, and that with some kids that would work.
Yeah.
They're motivated by
Very, yeah.
getting that next thing and getting that award and
Some
that
are
kind
not.
of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and of course, some you can do that in parenting, but the culture in general, they give awards to everybody now,
Yeah.
which has ruined that.
Yeah.
You know?
But
Yeah, they got this idea it wasn't fair to give
something that
somebody.
they wanted to be the
Yes.
first baseman or,
Yes.
or the second person in line, but when that person took a rest,
Yes,
they want to jump first base.
absolutely.
But if they were always cutting the clown,
Yes. Yeah, that's
watching
a
that behavior and say, you're gonna hurt somebody, you're gonna get hurt, blah, blah, blah.
That's
Then
a-
you need to follow these rules.
that's a great parenting
These rules
technique.
are, you can do that in your house.
Yes.
We had this presented to us right here at church with those 3 little boys.
Yes, absolutely.
We had obviously no direction. at
Yes.
all on anything.
And that's basically, I don't know if Joanne has told you kind of what they're doing, but she actually talked to Beth, and Beth had some
And
real
actually, that's
wisdom,
a good idea what they're doing.
and they've split them up. and they're sending them at different Wednesday nights. Not, I think two of them come, and then the other one come,
Yeah.
because one of them was the primary mover and shaker in the disobedience. But again, he gets rewarded too, because if he comes and he does well, then he gets to come the next time, you know. So it's kind of that kind of idea, because they had to be creative. And as you know, all of you have been parents, you got to get creative sometimes, you know. It's like, I remember years ago when we had young adults, and Lindsay and Shane were in the young adults, and we were talking to them about, Gage is a type A all the way. You know, he's going to be a Marine, or he's going to
Oh,
be,
absolutely.
you know, something like that. And Lindsay beat him, you know. It was like no effect, you know. So Shane came in one day, and Shane had some, it was 9mm or something on the counter, and he made him hold them up like that. And of course, eventually, you know, he's gonna get, no, you got to hold them up. You know, they were looking for every way possible, and that actually was effective with him. So you never know. You pray, God, please give me something to get food to this kid.
It's very interesting that you have two or more children raised in the same house,
Yes.
the same rules, same parents and everything, and they turn out so different. I mean, it's like night and day different.
Yes, because it's not all environment.
No,
It's,
no.
you know, God, David said, you wove me in my mother's womb. He weaves everybody differently. That's why you have 3, 4, 5 kids, they're all different. And there's some similarities, you know, but they're different. And he's created them for specific reasons and to do specific things in life. And we're stuck with the task of trying to figure out how to raise them all where they grow up loving the Lord and
What is,
submitting to authority. And
What's the little Brussels, the boy you're talking about?
Gage, he's the
Gage.
oldest.
Yes. So the first time I saw him, he was playing dodgeball out there, and that was the most aggressive little boy I've
He's
ever
very,
seen.
yes, he's a little Shane.
And
That's exactly who he
And
is.
so I told his dad, I said, man, that little boy of yours, I said, he is something. No, I said, I got something to tell you about your boy. He says, well, what do you do now? I said, no. I said, no. I said, man, he's real aggressive. He's going to be a good athlete. I said, he kind of reminds me of me because I'm
Yeah.
always going. I said,
Yeah, I
I'm
bet.
always going. And he is. I mean, you
Yeah.
can just see that kid.
And
you
Colt's
watch.
very different. He's the next one down. And then Ava's very different.
I know.
So,
It is.
Yeah, no, I'm just.
Shirley?
I'm just going to add just a little bit more. And right there on let's say the field, let's say you told them there 4 times, you know, with that. And they continue to do the same, whatever they were doing, they got them off key. Then you just say, okay, well, you're gonna stand up here for 5 minutes.
yep.
And that fast so long as 5 minutes.
That's true.
And they just have to get back right with the, you know, and but
something to get their attention.
Yeah.
and then you have to say, and those types of kids, and you want to watch that, you got, good job,
Yeah.
good job, you know, get them. All right, I want you to come over and stand over here with me. And go, what did I do? Oh, no, you just gonna stand right over there.
Well, my dad was a zero tolerance.
Yeah, that's.
Never asked more than once. That was it. He didn't have time to mess with you. You know, so
Yeah.
that's the way I was raised with it.
Yeah,
Shirley, you were, after your Marine career, you did something else, right?
I did. I went to school and I came up here, I did, we did all kinds of stuff up
Yeah.
here.
But you worked with kids. at
Yeah, I
school.
work with kids right here,
Yeah.
schools, right here,
Yes.
schools, yeah.
She was
Yes.
a special
Yeah.
ed teacher.
Yes, that's what I thought.
That's nice.
Wow.
Yeah, and plus I did, summer volleyball, well, I'm not volleyball, but we did all kinds of stuff with that summer.
Sports, summer sports.
Sports,
Yeah.
Yeah, and sports up here at the school every day with the kids.
Nice.
Fantastic.
And, you know.
And where was that? Where'd you do that? Bynum?
No, right here. Whitney.
Oh, in
Right
Whitney.
here.
Oh, did you really?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Whitney, oh, and we have some,
Wonderful.
Well, I wish I could raise my kids again, I would do it much better.
We all,
yeah, we
yeah.
all would.
I think we could do better the second run. Of course, if God gave us different kids, though, we might.
All bets are off.
Yeah.
Cheryl had 4 girls and a boy, and they were all involved in sports. And she coached baseball and softball when her kids were little, just because they were involved in it. And I don't know, some kids don't like it when their parents, their coach, other people.
Right.
But I was here visiting and the twins were like 9 or 10 years old and playing. And Sarah and Hannah are so much alike, and yet in some ways they're different.
Aren't they twins?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. They're really identical twins. Cheryl never was sure but they are.
Yeah.
They still look alike.
They look
at
very much
25.
alike. I remember them in high school.
Yeah, and Sarah would always act up on the field. And Cheryl took her off behind the cars and give her a whipping.
Oh.
And then she got mad because of it and acted worse.
Right.
So Cheryl made her run laps around the field.
All right. Well, we've got it all figured out now, so we can close for the night.
We're gonna bring somebody else.
Yeah.
In just 1 week?
I'm sorry.
Did we get 3 children in just 1 week?
Yeah, I guess so.
We're getting better.
We got it close. I think we're gonna jump on workers next time.
Husbands and the children.
It's a good combo, because you gotta raise your husband too, don't you?
You know,
And we have to remember that they have moved to.
Yes, they
the same
do.
church that I was going to, that I told you had the Focus on the Family seminar.
Yes.
We also did a marriage seminar that they used
I need to have a
to,
phone.
a set of DVDs, 3 DVDs.
Okay.
And I wish I could remember the
Oh.
pastor's, it's a pastor in
Yes.
Minnesota, and he does,
Oh.
and he does marriage counseling, and it was so good. And he was like a comedian.
Are you all right?
But he told us like how men and women are so different, not alike.
Into the 21st century.
Men don't think out of the box.
Right?
There's a box.
Yeah.
They think in the box.
That's right.
Women think all over the place.
Yes, very.
Yeah.
I mean, if you study it, I've got a book in my office where, you know, they point out all the biological differences and psychological differences. If they ever thought they could change a man to a woman or a woman to a man, it would only be cosmetic. Let me promise you, because we're created so differently, so differently. Well, Frank, you won't get to close with prayer for a long time, buddy. So you go ahead and do that tonight.